Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Welcome to the fourth class of biology of the chapter 11, that is reproduction in organism. So in the previous third class we have discussed about how male gametes and female gametes are produced inside the flower, that is megasporogenesis and microsporogenesis, and we have also learned about the process of fertilization to some extent. Today inshallah we will discuss about the fertilization process in detail, and we will also learn about the alternation of generation or life cycle of a flowering plant, and also the differences between true fruit and false fruit, and how the fruits are developed, how an ovary turns into a fruit and produces seed after fertilization. So let's start with the process of fertilization. So in the previous video and the previous class we have learned that when pollen grains, when pollen cells fall on the stigma of a carpel, then it produces a tube, and through this tube the tube is pushed up towards the bottom by the tube nucleus, and that is followed by the generative nucleus, and the generative nucleus produces two male gametes during this travel. And what happens, the two male gametes penetrates to the ovule through the micropyle, the pore present at the bottom of the ovule, and one male gamete fertilizes the egg or ovum, and one male gamete fertilizes the secondary nucleus. So here you see there is the whole carpel, and inside the carpel this pink or egg-shaped part is called ovule. So here we see that this part is commonly referred as ovary, and this pink colored egg-shaped part is called ovule, and inside the ovule there is the egg. So ovary, ovule, and ovum or egg. So let's revise this concept. When pollen falls on the stigma, pollen tube elongates to penetrate through the style and enters into the embryo sac, and one male gamete fuses with the ovum that produces zygote, and the other male gamete fuses with the secondary nucleus to form endosperm, which is triploid or 3N, and this phenomenon is called double fertilization. And now we will know about the consequences of fertilization. That means what changes take place inside the ovary and ovule after fertilization process, and this process is also called the development of new sporophyte, because after fertilization two gametes produces a diploid state. So the zygote is the diploid state of the plant. So this diploid state is called sporophyte. And now we know that zygote is the fertilized ovum. So here in a flower, typical flower, inside the ovule, so that is actually the ovule, and inside the ovule we see that when secondary nucleus fuses with male gamete, this phenomenon is called triple fusion, and this process produces endosperm, and when a male gamete fuses with the ovum, that produces the zygote. So here we find the zygote and the endosperm, and then the zygote that contains only a single cell, diploid, that divides transversely by mitosis process up and down. So here we see that inside the ovule, actually this part is called zygote and the upper part is called endosperm, and this zygote divides mitotically up and down transversely to produce a multicellular state. So among these multicellular zygote, the cell towards micropyle is called the basal cell. That means this cell towards the micropyle at the bottom is called the basal cell, and the top cell, that is upward this, and the top cell is called the apical cell. And then from the apical cell embryo is formed. So here we see that inside the ovule, the top cell, apical cell, produces the embryo. The embryo elongates in length and gets bigger in size, and that's how this multicellular embryo produces different parts. We see that the embryo contains three parts. Embryo develops into three parts: cotyledon, radicle, and plumule. So here we see that when the embryo differentiates into different parts, we see that two cotyledon or leaf-like part emerges inside the ovule, and then we also see a part called plumule, which will produce the stem when the seed gets germinated. And the bottom cell of the embryo that produces the radicle, the basal cell produces the radicle, actually that will form the root when gets germinated. So the radicle will eventually produce root, and the cotyledon will is somewhat leaf-like structure that will be decayed after some time, but the plumule produces the shoot part of the plant, of the new plant. And also the ovule turns into a mature seed. So here we see that the ovule wall becomes the seed coat or seed wall. So we also say that endosperm is produced from the secondary nucleus. We have discussed it about earlier. So the seed contains two parts. So the ovule turned into seed, and it contains two parts. It contains endosperm, and it also contains the embryo. And the embryo can be further divided into three parts. We have discussed it: cotyledon, radicle, and plumule. And now we will discuss about the life cycle of a flowering plant. That is also called the alternation of generation in a plant. We can divide the life cycle of a flowering plant into two time phases. A phase is called gametophytic stage, or that is the haploid state of a plant. And when the two gametes fuses together, it starts the sporophytic phase or diploid phase. So in a plant, the sporophytic phase, the orange colored region denotes actually the sporophytic stage, and the blue shaded part is called the gametophytic stage. So the sporophytic stage starts when the two opposite gametes fuses together to form embryo. So this embryo is the first cell having diploid state, and then from this embryo we find a mature seed, and when this seed germinates, it produces a fully grown plant that is also diploid state, and then it produces a flower, and inside the flower there is anther, and there is also ovule, and inside the anther there are pollen mother cell, and there is also megaspore mother cell inside the ovule. And up to this stage is diploid stage, and after when this pollen mother cell divides meiotically to produce daughter pollen cells, it enters into the haploid state or gametophytic state. Also, when the megaspore mother cell produces haploid megaspore, then we say that it enters into the gametophytic or haploid state or phase. So the maturation of the pollen cell or the egg, and this entire state actually belongs to the gametophytic stage, and this gametophytic stage ends and sporophytic end begins when these two opposite gametes fuse together to produce an embryo. So that's how a plant produces seed and enters into a sporophytic state, then produces gametes and enters into the gametophytic state. And this process, this alternation of generation between gametophytic and sporophytic state through generation after generation alters cyclically. That is why we say that the life cycle of a flowering plant, there's two phases, recurs cyclically, generation after generation in a plant. So now we will discuss about how fruits are originated. Actually, fruits are originated after the fertilization in flower. So we will discuss about the changes takes place after fertilization and what was there before fertilization. So before fertilization and in after fertilization, we say that there is the ovary, and there is ovary wall, and that contains ovule wall, and that contains ovule, and inside the ovule there is ovum and secondary nucleus. That is the state of a ovary before fertilization, and this parts changes into different fruit parts after fertilization. For example, the ovary wall turns into fruit wall. Let's we see an example. This ovary has turned into this fruit. So what we see here, we see that the ovary wall has turned into the fruit wall, and the ovary turned into a fruit, and the ovule wall turned into seed wall, and the ovule turned into seed, and inside the ovule the secondary nucleus turns into endosperm inside the seed, and the ovum inside the ovule turns into the embryo inside the seed. So then we will discuss about the categorization of fruits. We categorize fruits into two types, true fruits and false fruits, on the basis of which flower parts turns into a mature fruit. We say some fruits as true fruits. Actually, most of the fruits are considered as true fruits. The fruits in which only the ovary contributes to the development of fruit. When the ovary turns into fruit, and the fruit actually originates from the ovary and no other part of the flower, this type of fruit is called true fruit. And what are considered as false fruit? Along with the ovary, if the fruit comes from ovary as well as any part of the flower, these developed fruits are called false fruits. So along with ovary, actually that should not be flower, that should be ovary. So if a fruit is developed from the ovary as well as other parts of the flower, these fruits will be considered as false fruits. As an example, we can say that most of the fruits are called true fruits. For example, mango, grape, jackfruit, etc. And false fruits are the fruits, for example, apple, chalta, etc. So let's see a figure. So here we see that the left one, that is mango, example of true fruit, and the right one, apple, example of false fruit. So here we see in the mango, the wall of the fruit, that is fruit wall, actually comes from the ovary wall, and the fleshy part inside the mango is actually the internal part of the ovary. And then we also see there is a seed. Actually this seed comes from the ovule of the mango flower. So here we see that the mango fruit comes entirely from the ovary, and no other part of the flower has contributed to the development of mango. That is called true fruit. But in case of apple, we see that actually this part, we see that actually this part inside of the apple comes from the ovary and the remaining fleshy part of the apple actually comes from the part of flower other than ovary. So that is why we see that in apple the total fruit comes from the ovary as well as the other part of the flower. That is why apple is considered as false fruit. Let's see a video. So here we see that an apple flower, and this part is actually the ovary, and this white part is ovule, and this red part is ovum. And you see the pink colored part, that is actually not part of the ovary, that is any other part of the flower. But what happens to this flower after fertilization? We see that the corolla and other parts are released from the flower after fertilization, but the ovary gets squeezed in size. The ovary gets squeezed in size, shrinks in size, and the pink colored part, not the part of the ovary, increases in size and volume, and actually contributes to the fleshy part of the apple. So here the ovary actually contributes to the inner part of the fruit. Actually, that is not the part we consume. That doesn't contribute to the fleshy part. The fleshy part of the most of the part of the apple, this fleshy part comes from the flower part other than the ovary. That is why apple is called false fruit. So you have a homework. Describe the fertilization process in plants with appropriate figure. And number 2, explain the life cycle of a flowering plant. No more today. সবাই ভালো থাকুন ইনশাআল্লাহ। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।